Welcome to Your College Bound Kid,
a podcast for parents, college counselors, students, and anyone who wants a weekly deep dive into the world of college admissions.
My name is Vince, and I've been doing admissions since 1989 and college counseling since 1998 in California.
I'm Lisa, and I'm a clinical psychologist and college counselor. I have a daughter in college, a daughter in high school, and a son in middle school. After 30 years in Chicago, we recently moved to North Carolina.
My name is Mark. I'm a college coach in Atlanta and the parent of two daughters. Karis, a graduate of Davidson College, and she is the founder of the Spanish tutoring company, SpanishHelpToday.com. And Joy is a graduate of the University of Georgia, and she is getting her master's degree at North Carolina State University. This week in the news, UC admits record number of Californians and far fewer out-of-state students. It is an article that appeared in the LA Times by their lead college counseling writer, Teresa Watanabe. And there's another article that's so good on the similar kind of topic. We're going to talk about both of them today. And that article is entitled, UC Could Grow by 33,000 California Students, equivalent of a new campus, to meet the surging demand. Also LA Times, also Teresa Watanabe. Both articles courtesy of Vince Garcia, and we've got Vince here today to talk about them. Our question from a listener would be bonus content time, and that's Lisa taking a look at what you can do as a parent to stop your kid from feeling like if they don't get into an elite school, something's wrong with them. And for our interview, which is also our college spotlight, it'll be part 2 with Heath Einstein, Dean and Director at Texas Christian University, also known as TCU. But I'm here with Vince. What's going on, man?
Not much. Busy times,
Yeah.
Going back to school, seniors, juniors, they're all ready to get started.
I thought you were saying you're going back to school. I'm like, is there like a doctorate here in the mix that I haven't heard of? Is going to be you, Dave, Lisa? Be surrounded by the doctorates. No, we're done with that, aren't we? The formal stuff.
Yes, we're done with that. We're no student loans.
Yeah, lifetime learners we can be, but there's, as one of my colleagues likes to say, there's good old YouTube University. A lot of articles. Well, I have to thank you, Vince. These are fantastic articles that you sent. The content is super rich. I've actually started following Teresa Watanabe on Twitter because she cranks out some great stuff. But before we dive into that, we have to do our traditional admissions tip and our admissions vernacular and our big number. Hey, Vince, any tip you want to give today or not? Anything come to mind?
Absolutely. One thing that I have started to say to my juniors is that typically at your high school, there are college visitors and they're doing in-person and virtual visits. And I think as juniors, you want to make sure you drop by your college office or your counseling department and find out if you can attend some of those meetings, because it's a great way to build your college knowledge. So drop by the college counseling center at your school and find out how you can be a student and visitor during one of those meetings.
And something else I'll say about that, and this is going to be much more true for an Occidental or a Pitzer, even a Cal Lutheran, than it would be for a really large school. But you know this, Vince, because you worked at those schools. Like those schools, they almost like to build a relationship with applicants and know who they are to some extent. And if you can sort of make your presence known as a junior, and then maybe they see you later at a fair, or some schools have interviews. I mean, I always like the students I work with, especially at those smaller schools. I want, when that application comes across that first reader, I want them to be like, oh, this is Vince Garcia. I've been looking forward to reading this. Like he sent me this amazing email, or he asked these great questions when he was a junior. And then your application is sort of read through the context of who you are. And you can't do that with certain schools, but you can with some. Whittier, I'm just giving some California schools. Any thoughts?
Absolutely. And establishing that connection where the admissions person knows you through multiple visits, either virtually or in person, can really make a strong impression. And the second time around, especially in your senior year, I always tell students to have a few more questions so you can sort of talk about why you're interested in a place. And if you can make your pitch during the meeting to other students, the admissions officer will definitely not forget you.
I love it. Love it. And our admissions vernacular is ghost applicant or ghost app. And that refers to, well, Vince, I'm going to let you. I'm so confident that that's a term you've used or familiar with. Why don't you explain it to our guests?
I think you mean by ghost applicant, is it when the first time they apply is when they submit the app and they haven't been in the funnel before, the admissions funnel before?
Yep, bingo. So, a lot of terms for it is stealth applicant, ghost app, stealth app. You hear those two used interchangeably a lot. So as many as 35%, and some schools that number's higher, some it's lower, that this person all of a sudden becomes an application and they weren't even in the database for the school. And you got schools buying more than 500,000 names out here through student search, trying to build a really large funnel. But people just get into the pool in different ways. And sometimes through all your initial outreach, you don't capture someone and then bam, they pop up and you're like, where did this person come from? They're not in our database. We didn't buy their name through one of the services. They never attended a fair. They never attended an information session. They never filled out a request form online. They never attended a virtual session. They didn't do any of that stuff. So the terms you'll often hear: stealth app, ghost app. There we go. As I like to say to Dave, bingo, bingo, winner, winner, chicken dinner.
But I would say that stealth app is probably the weakest app because
sure, exactly.
In terms of demonstrated interest, they're going to look askew at that app. So if you're not in the funnel,
demonstrated interest. Yeah, demonstrated interest and demonstrated understanding, right? Like you're not giving them confidence that you know who they are, you know what you're getting into. You're going to have a harder time convincing them that you're a match for their institution. And so you're a higher risk from a attrition standpoint or retention standpoint. Now, one way to compensate for that would be if they do have college-specific essays, write great ones. But ideally, you're listening to this podcast, don't be that ghost app or stealth app. Just don't do it. It's the opposite of what we were talking about before. If you show up as a junior, to a group info session, which I don't know if, I'm sure you do this, Vince. I tell people those are group interviews and you go to those group info sessions, right? You remember who stands out either way as an admission officer in front of those sessions. So I'm not referring to the group info sessions that occur when you visit a college. Those info sessions are often quite large. And in those larger ones, to be honest, the student will rarely be remembered. But what I'm referring specifically to are the info sessions when an admission officer visits your child's high school, or quite honestly, anything in a really small group setting. Yeah, you do that kind of thing, you won't be the ghost or stealth app. So it's actually the antithesis of what we talked about in the tip, really. We went from one extreme all the way to the other there.
Absolutely. And one thing I would say, because I've noticed this when I work with students, sometimes they turn off the camera and microphone.
Yeah.
And if you're in an info session, you're not leaving any impression except they're writing your name down and say, we didn't see this person. They were there, but I don't know who was there. So turn on your camera and ask one or two questions.
Yeah, that's really bad. I do a weekly webinar just for 30 minutes from 9 to 9:30. And first 15 minutes I teach, and the next 15 minutes I take questions from students and parents. And I hate it when I see a blank screen. I feel like I'm like in an elevator by myself. And I get it. I don't want to be in judgment. I make announcements. I say, listen, for all I know, you could be nursing your baby. So I'm not casting judgment. But if you can at all come off that screen, it really makes a difference in terms of feeling like you're connecting with somebody. That's a terrible look. And that's true for your students in classes too, if they ever have that. So yeah, that's a missed opportunity right
Yeah.
there.
Yeah,
Yeah,
absolutely.
yeah. We're in this new high tech age. We need to talk this way, because hey, we know this. Like, yeah, right now in the world of visiting, you're back to hybrid mode. I mean, during 2001, that's all schools were doing. Now the visits have picked up, but they're, but both visits are there now, right? Some people are doing the Zoom, some are doing the in person.
Yeah, they're doing
And
both.
yeah, they're doing both.
For the colleges out there who are listening, one suggestion I have for the East Coast is try to make your meeting times not just work in the East Coast. Because
Yeah.
when you look at information sessions and visit sessions, they're literally not accessible for a West Coast student. The same with interview slots. So if you can open up some time, Pomona's done a really good job with that. Wisconsin does a really good job of having information sessions that start after school Pacific Standard Time or daylight time. It can really make a difference in terms of interest and allowing West Coast students to establish interest.
You know what? That's a pretty unacceptable error to make. I mean, that's really bad. Like, you don't have to be in admissions very long to know you shouldn't do that. I like to have conversations with people that flip to the other side of the desk. Julia's actually working on an interview for this with several of her friends who flipped from admissions to college counseling and the new perspective that they have. That's one of my favorite questions. What are the things that you look back and like, oh my goodness, I cannot believe and this would have to be up the top of the list if people were doing that. But, I will hear people say things like, we were sending out decisions right when people are in school.
Yes.
And so you're getting the admit and the deny right in the middle of school day electronically. Like, oh my goodness, what were we thinking? It's pretty bad. And this reminds me of this. Like, come on. There's 3 time zones. You got to know what certain times kids are in school. I don't know. That I don't have a lot of grace for that one. That's a pretty bad mistake. I can't imagine. How widespread do you see that, Vince? Pretty common?
I have to say, I'm seeing a swing back. It's like COVID is disappearing and colleges' virtual opportunities are absent. They're just not there. And then you look at the times and they're not, it's clear that somebody's not thinking about the West Coast or Hawaii and wanting those students to do virtual or interview times because they're right in the middle of school.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah. I on Saturday I attended a college fair. I'm on the committee for it, planning committee for it. 4,500 attendees. So this thing's huge.
Wow.
And I've been a part of planning it for the last several years. It's several schools in our area, Westminster and Woodward and Marist and Kip, the 4 schools that are on the leadership team. And then we invite a bunch of other schools too. And it just felt so good to be back like that because we've been closed for COVID for the last couple of years.
Mm-hmm.
And to me, it just really symbolized like, okay, we're back. Several hundred colleges came from several California schools. I mean, national fair. And, it's interesting. Some people are masked, some are not. So you kind of see that we're still in hybrid mode there when it comes to that. And then people are doing the school visits. So you really require students to have a versatile skill set now because they have to be able to be strong in person and they also need to be strong on camera.
Yes.
Because we're in that world where there's both. All right. Well, I'm pulling my big number, right from one of the articles that we're talking about today, the one we'll start out talking about. And it is the big number is 19, which might not seem like a lot, but it's a lot when it's percent. And so the name of the article is UC admits record number of Californians and far fewer out-of-state students. So, it's interesting, and we'll get into this, Vince, but I feel like in my time doing this work, it's like year 23 for me, I've been like a ping pong ball, go back and forth with how California swing back and forth when it's come to out-of-state recruitment. So, so I remember like, the early part of 2000s, when I used to tell families like, man, good luck getting into California, especially UCLA and Berkeley out of state was just brutal. And then after the global financial crisis, 2008, California intentionally was recruiting out of state because of the budget shortage. And all of a sudden I noticed it got way easier. I was like shocked people were getting in. I wasn't used to getting in. And then, of course, that led to less in-state people. And the UCs in particular are so in demand. And then your tax rates are fairly high there. So you had a lot of angry people. Like, I'm paying a lot of tax dollars. I can't get in my in-state school. And then that's blowback to politicians. And then they're going to lose their job if things don't change. And, you and I kind of talked about some of this a little bit in the past. And now you see the changes that were made. In fact, we did address it when we talked about the article with Berkeley. Berkeley was going to reduce their size because of pressure from the local housing associations and others. And we were like, man, they're not going to take that out of in-state people. They're going to take that out of state. And so now you see what's happened. You've come back full circle here. And this article, this first one that you sent me, it really provides like hardcore numbers and data. And it shows that California actually increased. So they admitted 85,268 first-year students, a 1.2% increase, or 1,045 more students than last year. But that 19% decline in out-of-state students, which is 5,359 less. And then they also whacked international. And so there was a decrease there of 12.2% or 2,442. And then it talks a little bit about how the debate that's around this, like, because that's a lot of lost revenue because, UCs are really expensive out-of-state schools. So, but fortunately, California's been doing so well financially. There's been a surplus in the budget. They literally took money out of that budget to compensate for the lack of in-state tuition. They were, the lack of out-of-state tuition that they were losing by taking less out-of-state and more in-state. And so the article talks about how there's a hot debate on that, and not everybody feels the same way. Some people are like, hey, we should be serving our residents. This is what you're supposed to do. The article actually talks about how in 2008, prior to the global financial crisis, 9.5% of students at Berkeley and UCLA were out of state. And it went from 9.5 to 24%. So 2.5 times in 2021. And then, of course, the blowback happened. And so some of the debate it talks about in this article is some people are like, hey, that's too much budget cuts. We're capping into California money that we could use for other things. And then some people are like, we're losing a diversity too by not tapping into other people from different places. But then, of course, the argument for it is, but we're the ones paying the tax dollars for our institution and our own kids can't get in. And so it kind of recounts both sides. And it particularly highlights UCLA, Berkeley, and UCSD, San Diego. We've mentioned before that those three schools in particular draw the most out-of-state applicants of the 9 in the UC system. So I'd like to know your thoughts on this article before we bounce to the other great article you sent me.
Sure. Well, there's so much to unpack there. And what's interesting about the percentage that you threw out at the beginning, the 19% was the decline of admitted students who were out of state, and 12% overall admitted students, less than that were international students. So it was a very concerted effort throughout the whole UC system to really drop those numbers. And the governor and the legislature, which is Democratic, did a really good job in terms of responding, and they replaced that money. They have allotted $31 million for the next 2 years, and then it's renewable for the next 4. So for at least 4 more years, you're going to see the number of students admitted out of state and internationally reduced, and it may go back to, maybe it won't be the 9%, but there are some who would like it to go back to 10%. And there's going to be a little bit of a push period, I think, for the schools like San Diego, Berkeley, and UCLA. Um, they'll still be able to admit more, but not at numbers that they were currently. So the governor and the legislature replaced that out of state money so they could admit more students, and the UC system responded by admitting more students. What was interesting was also throughout the article, and I really encourage people to read the article if they get a chance, was that 5 of the 8 campuses that admit undergraduates actually reduced the number of students they admitted because they had problems with over enrollment the year before. So if you look at the article, there's a great spot there with UC Santa Barbara where they were able to take, they admitted 273 fewer Californians than last year, but they increased their wait list by 700, and they took almost 3,000 students off the wait list, which is great. And 633 of those students accepted the offer. So Davis, Irvine, UCLA, Berkeley, San Diego all admitted more students from the wait list because they all knew that they couldn't over enroll. The other thing that was really stood out to me was if you look at the admitted class, 47% of the admitted UC students came from low income backgrounds. So that is definitely a criteria. And California has a large number of families who do meet that threshold, but 47% is really going to change the landscape for those families who are 44% of the admitted students were the first ones to go to college. So those are two things that as you think about the University of California, and you are in California, that's definitely going to be a plus factor in your application process.
Yeah, just to reinforce how tight things were, there's a quote from Lisa Prescott, who I interviewed on our podcast. She did 3 interviews actually with me. If you're interested, she did one on foster care youth. She did another on how UCs make admissions decisions in general. And then she did one exclusively on understanding UCSB Santa Barbara. 3 great interviews if you want to go. They're all in our archives. But there's a quote from Lisa Prescott in here, and it says, last year, UC Santa Barbara scrambled to house students in hotels after a last-minute crunch in housing requests and shortages of off-campus rentals due to an influx of non-students who wanted to work remotely in the scenic coastal city. And then she says, Prescott said, all student housing requests have been accommodated this year. And she basically says in the article, well, I'll read it. We couldn't risk over enrolling by a single student, she says. We're at capacity, and we did not want to experience those housing issues again. So that's a strong statement. So you kind of see the crunch they had. And the article does talk about how the yield is up in some cases.
Yes,
Talks
yes.
about, I think isn't UCLA, it went from 44 to 54%. And
in 10 years, that's remarkable.
Yeah. So that demand is there. So I have a question for you. I have 2 questions for you, Vince. You want me to take them one at a time or both at once?
Both at once.
Both at once. All right. So one question is, and I've consistently read this in article after article, that the biggest demand is for the 3 campuses of UCB, Berkeley, UCLA, Los Angeles, and SD, San Diego. My perception as someone who works with people all around the country is that people sort of see Berkeley and UCLA as the most coveted. And this is just my anecdotal experience. San Diego tends to get grouped more with like Irvine and Santa Barbara. But yet clearly San Diego is getting more demand. And my theory on it has to do with the fact that it's such a power in tech, engineering, computer science, all of that. And there's such a demand for all of those schools worldwide, not just in this country. I look at like the ridiculous applicants Georgia Tech gets. So my first question is, do you think that is it the tech demand that's leading San Diego to be grouped with Berkeley and with UCLA? Because my experience just talking with most of my applicants around the country is they tend to bucket UCLA and Berkeley as kind of top tier, and they tend to bucket San Diego with Irvine and Santa Barbara. And in some cases, some depending on who it is, Davis and Santa Cruz might get grouped in that bucket as well. So that's question one. And then question two is, do you think it's a good thing that California is reducing its out-of-state students to take more in-state students?
So I'll take the first one. It's interesting. San Diego, in last year's cycle, in terms of number of apps, they were number 5. And Irvine came very close to having the most applications in the University of California system. And I think that students have become really savvy at looking at the top UCs and trying to apply to the ones where they feel like they have the best chances. So I think what happened was they looked at San Diego. It's in La Jolla, which is remarkable. It's a beautiful community. You walk down the hill and you're right on the beach. And they saw that they came in 5th. So a lot of students said, oh, I might have a better chance. So that by looking at the application numbers, I think the biggest reason that people applied was that a year before they were in 5th, and this year they skyrocketed almost to first place. So let me
push back a little on that. So that makes sense to me more for internal California numbers. I don't sense out-of-state people are being that savvy, because clearly, and you and I have talked about this in other articles we've talked on here. For those of you who are new, Vince is Mr. California. He did admissions at Cal Lutheran. He did admissions at Occidental. He did admissions at Pomona. And he's been a reader at Berkeley, UCLA, and San Diego, I think, too. So he's got 30 years working in the state. And one of the reasons why we wanted him on here is to make us sensitive to West Coast issues, everything like that. And Sylvia Borgo is another substitute co-host who comes from San Diego, and she also brings a great perspective, because we don't want to do what those schools are doing and ignore the West Coast, especially when I ran the stats and saw that we have almost triple the listeners from California as any other state. I said, we need to give California some respect. So, but you and I have discussed that, clearly the caps on out of state are more stringently applied to UCSD, UCB, and to UCLA.
Mm-hmm.
So that tells me it's not just an internal California thing. To me, what you said, that seems like sort of internal California knowledge. I don't sense the average out-of-state person knows that stat you gave. So no. What are your thoughts on that?
I think you're right. They don't know that. And so they apply, but they're also not aware that the open door, they're closing the door and making a keyhole.
Right.
So I believe that over time, applications to the University of California will start to decline or top off, because international and out-of-state students, until they get the signal that it's more open, like California experiences another economic crisis and they have to go back out to recruit because those out-of-state dollars are really important. I think that you'll begin to see those numbers fall, because college counselors, people that students are listening to outside of California, will get the message that California is no longer as open as it used to be.
Yeah, it's just clearly San Diego's hot, and more power to them. So what are your thoughts on the second question? Is it a good or bad thing? The arguments against it are it's costing the state a lot of money to have to subsidize what we could get from out-of-state students, and that money could go elsewhere, and we're missing out on an element of diversity by not taking more internationals and more national kids, But the arguments for it is we're paying our tax dollars. It shouldn't be so hard to get into our own schools. Like, where do you come down on that?
So for me, I think it's important that we serve California's families and students. And if we need, because we have the tax dollars and California is in a healthy position economically, we need to make sure, because California has the highest number of college going students in the United States, we need to make sure that door is open wide and accessible for students. So I'm okay taming down the numbers from out of state and internationally.
I figured you had to say that, man, and you had a lot of California people mad at you. but I know you. I know you're genuine, and I know you're saying what you really believe.
Yes,
So,
yes, I do.
yeah.
I do believe that, because it is. We do spend a lot of money on higher education, and it's a great system. And if it's not accessible to the tax base of the state residents, then I think there's a problem.
Yeah, and one of the things I want people to take away from this is readjust your expectations if you're applying to the UC schools, especially UCLA, Berkeley, and San Diego, but not only them. I mean, the others are all hard to get into as well. I mean, Merced and Riverside are noticeably not as hard, but I mean, it's not easy getting into Irvine or Santa Barbara, Santa Cruz Davis either. It's just not. And and out of state, you can't go by past projections of, well, my brother got in, or blah, 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 or a lot of people from our school. This is a new game in town here. And so that's one of the takeaways here. I mean, that's a big reduction to take about a fifth less. So that's one of the takeaways. So that's also a good time for us to segue to the second article.
And now it's time for Hot Topics in the News.
And this article is an attempt to maybe people won't necessarily have to be forced to have such a draconian choice. Maybe the answer is grow the number of spots. You could accommodate both people. So this article, same author, UC could grow by 33,000 California students, equivalent of a new campus, to meet the surging demand. And so we already talked about the demand. There's no need to necessarily talk a lot about that. But the article basically said record surges in apps is leading schools to look at increasing their seats by 33,000 by the year 2030. And it says the equivalent of building a new campus. So there's no plan to add another campus, right? You've got the 9 already, and then I guess San Francisco, if you count grad school, 10, and then not plans for an 11th. But the plan is that half the growth would come at the UC's most popular campuses, and it lists, once again, it's reinforcing that point. It's the same author. It says the most popular campuses, UCLA, Berkeley, San Diego. Of course, this year, San Diego had 131,000 apps. Yep. So it makes sense for that to be true. But once again, it kind of goes back to what we were talking about before. Clearly, they're grouping San Diego with Berkeley and UCLA. And it says part of it would be reducing the number of out-of-state and international students given to Californians. But it looks like they're also looking at doing some creative planning to see if they could accommodate some more seats. And it says the ambitious goals were presented at the UC Board of Regents meeting in San Francisco this week, and they represent a 50% increase from the previous announced plan expansion. So the regional plan was, we're going to add 20,000. Now they said, no, let's add 50% to that. We're going to add 30,000 instead of 20,000, and we're going to do it by 2030. And it talks about the additional resources of faculty, classrooms, testing, labs, all of that. And we're going to make an unequivocal commitment to serve the state. And so the main thing the article talks about here is really focused on California. Is not really, I kind of said tongue in cheek, well, do both, take out of state and take more California. But the focus really here is this is a plan to take more California. It's clearly unapologetically directed at taking more California. It mentions here, it says, here's a quote. McCarty said he and the legislative colleagues would be very open to funding a continued phase down of non-resident students to as little as 10% of undergraduate enrollment. That's Texas right there. Texas does 10%. And it says the system-wide average right now is at 18%, with UCLA, Berkeley, and San Diego at 24%. And it goes on to say music to my ears, this, that, the other. So, yeah, I mean, I guess one of my questions for you about this article, Vince, is kind of links back to what we talked about a while ago. We talked about Berkeley and San Diego. I mean, you saw it with Lisa's comments, Prescott. There's a clear sense that the campuses are burgeoning now. The housing is a challenge.
Mm-hmm.
Getting in courses can be a challenge. Impacted majors can be a challenge.
Mm-hmm.
What are your thoughts on how they pull all this off, like without decreasing quality?
Sure. So one thing I wanted to touch on regarding the last article as well, and it feeds into this one, is that one thing that was evident in the article, the first article, was that transfer applicants really tumbled for all the UCs last year. So for the student who's thinking to themselves, I'd like to go to the University of California, I think your opportunity in the next 3 years, if you come in as a transfer student, is going to be higher than it was recently, because they're really seeing the numbers decrease. So the way that they hope to increase the number of students by not building another campus is a couple of things. One is UCLA and Berkeley are looking to expand and use satellite campuses. So, for instance, there's a place for marine science or ocean science down in San Pedro where they would open up a campus there and they could expand the number of students they could take. At Berkeley, they're talking about using Moffett Field, which is owned by NASA, and they would start a new aerospace, and engineering major. And UC Davis is thinking about opening up an innovation hub in Sacramento, which is about 45 minutes away. So increasing campuses by creating satellites. And also they're thinking about, I saw this year at UCLA, they offered 4 different sessions of courses. So you had A, B, C, and D. And so if you increase the number of courses that students can take, the percentage that will graduate in 4 years increases. So they're thinking about that. And they're also thinking about ways to help students who are currently at the University of California finish faster. So instead of taking 5 years, 5.5, 6 years, how do we make sure that they finish faster? Well, we're going to open up summer, and we're probably honestly going to admit students who have higher course counts and are bringing an AP and community college credit. So you'll see, those students do begin to do better. And then at Merced and Riverside, which actually have the space to add more, they're increasing the number of offerings to make sure that the funnel is open, that we have the professors. So adding more graduate students. You can't expand campuses if the professors aren't there. So they're increasing graduate enrollment to make sure that those professors are there. And then they also wanted to make sure that as they expand the campuses and summer options, that they also figure out a plan for housing, which is not primarily discussed in this article, but I think is a good question to ask about this plan to increase graduation and increase enrollment by doing all of those things. And across campuses, I could see the 33,000 happening, but where are they going to live? That would be my question.
Well, I have a question. Where they're going to live, especially on certain campuses. Which would you say are the tightest ones for housing? Certainly we know Berkeley is, we know UCSB is. Do you put UCLA and San Diego and Irvine in that group as well?
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Yes. They're surrounded by really expensive housing options, and it would be hard to build up.
Well, there's that question. And I also have a question about courses, because that has been a challenge before. There have been some outspoken, even professors that have spoken out at some of these campuses. And as great as the UCs are, they don't have the most impressive 4-year graduation rates given the caliber of the student they're attracting. And sometimes sometimes that's money. You talked about the high percentage of kids getting aid and being under-resourced, and a higher percentage of first gen. And we know so many different challenges come with that, being first gen and being under-resourced. So that maybe that largely explains it. But we do know that students have had a challenge getting courses at UCs.
And they have, one of the ways the article discusses explicitly is continuing to offer robust online education, which could get some pushback from students who feel that they want to pay and they want to be sitting in the class in a traditional way. But if you want to expand the campus, one of the easiest ways to do it is to offer more online classes. So that's also part of the proposal.
I have a question for you, Vince. Do you see interest in Merced and Riverside growing in the last decade? Because I don't see from the students I work with a lot of interest in those two schools.
I do think that, and part of the proposal is that they would add more facilities and programs that would make those campuses more attractive. Like, for instance, at Merced, they're thinking about, and Riverside, adding a medical science program, which might be a direct admit into medical school. And then by offering those kinds of programs, then you slowly build the infrastructure that businesses and companies will build. So maybe if there was some other things in computer science, for instance, or business, if they added those to those two campuses, I think eventually you would see more students interested in those options. But part of the reason that they're less appealing is that they're in parts of California that are less well known and considered sort of rural. There's no city life. It's, if you're out in Riverside, I would call that a suburb, a big suburb, and Merced is definitely rural compared to everything else in California.
Also, I think the age of the schools too.
Yes.
Because I know that anytime something's newer, it just takes a while to get established. And are they the two newest? I know Merced is significantly newer than.
They are the two newest, yes.
So, yeah, so I thought. And so I think that's part of the correlation as well. There's just not as much tradition. I don't know what your take on this is. I am not of the impression that they are bad places. In fact, I'll word it the opposite way. I'm of the impression they're good places. The public just doesn't give them the respect that they deserve. I don't know do you see it that way? Or
I do, and I think they are really good places. They're the most diverse in the whole system. Most of the numbers for diversity for under-resourced and underrepresented students, their populations are really diverse. So if you are a student of color and you want to be in a diverse environment, that's your ticket right there.
Well, I have to say something. California the schools are just so racially and socioeconomically diverse. Now, these stats came out. The first article said for the third year in a row, the Latino, Latina, Latinx, we use your term, population, Hispanic, was the largest 3 years in a row at 37%, followed closely behind Asian at 35%. You're talking about 72% of the students are Latino or Asian. And then the Black community has been growing. It may be lower, closer to 5, but California doesn't have a big Black community. You've got Jewish students, you've got international students, multicultural students, Caucasian students. And it's just, sometimes you'll hear people say, we're really diverse. We're 30% students of color. You must hear that talk from certain schools. And you're like, what are you talking about? You even know it. And I find that sometimes, I love the Pacific Northwest, but those Pacific Northwest schools, they can't even touch California when it comes to diversity.
No.
And so, California's just very, very rich that way, rich in terms of cultural. But I was thinking when you said Merced and Riverside are the most diverse, but for some people that might also be a negative for them. Just depends on your perspective on that, whether that's a positive or not. Beauty's in the eye of the beholder.
Yes. And it's always surprising when I have conversations with some parents and they make comments that are, where they're obviously uncomfortable with the changes that are occurring within the UC system. So 47% come are below the poverty line. 44% are first generation. There's some level of them being uncomfortable because they feel that their space is going away.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So that can be a challenge for me to respond to, because if you look at the goals from 1960 on, the University of California, the goals have not changed. They have always been to how do we increase the number of first generation college students from under-resourced schools go to higher education. And so the whole system is based on that, and they're doing a great job.
Yeah, and for some people that don't understand that, if you're thinking macro from a macro perspective, you can change the trajectory of a whole generation of people. If you and so that can be really appealing to you. You go into education to make a difference, and you can get someone and enter them into this environment, create an engine of social mobility, and you change that generation for the next 8, to whatever hundreds of years. Where sometimes you may, like, that well-resourced kid is just as deserving and just as worthy, but the mindset sometimes may be, that's a kid that's going to be fine wherever they go. We have a chance to maybe change the whole trajectory of this kid's life over here, which plays into some of having that goal and having that vision.
Yes. I'll never forget. I was at a college fair listening to a presentation about college essays, and I made a comment sort of to the group, and then a woman came up to me afterwards, and she goes, I don't know if you'll remember me, but I was an undocumented student from this high school, and you helped me find the money to go to Occidental. And she was working she had become a citizen. She graduated from college. She got a graduate degree. And now she helps students who want to transfer or enroll in the University of California, Santa Barbara. And I was just so impressed by the hundreds of students, just by helping that one student.
Mm-hmm.
That person is now supported, thousands of students go to the University of California and receive higher education like she did. So you never know. It's like a pebble, and then the waves go out.
That's a great story. Thanks for sharing that. Nothing like doing what we tell people to do in the essay: show, don't tell. I love it.
Yeah.
So let's wind down. What should our takeaway of our listeners be from both of these articles, Vince? What do you think?
Takeaway: out of state international students, you better be super strong. And if you want to go to the University of California, think about transferring, because that door is going to be open wider, and they've had trouble since COVID figuring out how to keep students enrolled and on the track to transfer. So I think there's going to be more spaces for transfer students in the next few years.
No, that's awesome. Let's close with that. Thanks, my friend. Great to have you on. I really appreciate you. Appreciate your perspective, and I appreciate even the conversations that you and I have even between episodes about college admissions and life. And you're in the College Counselors Confab group, and you're really, really big addition to our team. And it's great having you on monthly versus sporadically.
Well, thank you so much for having me, and I look forward to talking again in about 3 weeks.
Yeah, keep sending me those great articles.
All right.
All right, thanks, Vince.
Take care.
And now it's time for a question from one of our listeners.
What's going on, Lisa?
Oh, well, everything and nothing, right? My 2-year started school last week, so I had to start getting up super early in the morning. And that was a hard week. I was very tired, but I'm doing better today. So that's all good.
It feels more like everything than nothing.
Yeah, that's true.
In my world.
Well, you managed to pack it full.
Yeah, Lisa is going to be doing bonus content And I've learned that a lot of times podcasting is best if you don't talk too much ahead of time about what you're going to say. It's sort of like watching a movie 2 days in a row. Not that I know anything about watching movies, but you guys know what I mean. So I'm excited because I just know what Lisa's topic is, and I know she's going to have some great stuff for us. But before we get into that, I do want to share one more thing I think that would surprise people if they were in admissions. And this has to do with scattergrams. So a lot of times when people discover scattergrams, for those of you who don't know what I'm talking about, they're like axes where you can see intersections between GPA and test scores, and they have different colored dots, and they show who got in, who was admitted, who was denied, waitlisted. So if you think of a big giant plot and you can go in and see, oh, the kid with 13, 20, and 3.6, didn't get in, but over here there's another kid that had 13.60 and 3.3 that got in. And so what would surprise people is how unreliable scattergrams are as a way of forecasting who's going to get in.
Right.
Because scattergrams do not take institutional priorities into consideration. They do not, they don't say anything about the caliber of the writing, your activities, obviously your personal qualities, your recommendations. There's just so much that's not in there. It's just an intersection between test score and GPA. And we know that in selective pools, most of the kids are qualified academically. And so the wait list and the denied pool is not that statistically different than the admit pool. So they can give a false sense of hope when you combine that with the fact that people naturally gravitate to sort of seeing things how they want to see them.
Right, of course.
That's a kind of a dangerous combination. And so at some point, I'm going to talk with Julia about this, but, where Julia's work, they don't even let students see them because it leads to so many people saying, hey, Look at that kid. He got in. My stats are better than his, so that means I have a good shot. No. Did you know that dad donated $20 million for the new student center?
Yeah, they don't just put like a big dollar sign on that one,
Right. There's all kinds of stories behind who gets in, and just an intersection in a plot gives a false sense. And sometimes when people discover them, I see them they feel like they know how this works more than they really know how it works. And so they're dangerous, really, because they can, I'm not saying they have no usefulness at all, but it's, that whole saying, what's that saying? A little bit of knowledge is dangerous, something like that.
Yes. That is the
That's how I feel about scattergrams. A little bit of knowledge. Thoughts, Lisa?
Yeah, you have to be really careful with them. I know, like on SCORE, which Lily's school used, like they would aggregate data from 5 years. So if you're looking at a school like Boston University and they have 5 years of data, then it's going to give the impression that it's more admissible. More students are admissible than they are. Now, I got wise to that. And then if I limited it to like 1 year or 2 years, then I would see a different picture. But so that's misleading too. Like things change over time.
That's a really good point.
I really find that they're useful is if you take a student, they're like, I really want to go to Reed, right? Let's say, and you show the parent, like, this is the scattergram from your school. And these are all the kids who got in. Yours is like, your kid is way over here in the other quadrant. That is a useful thing. Like it's like a very clear case of, ruling out. But other than that, like it's so unpredictable. It's such an unpredictable process because again, we have no idea what those institutional priorities are for that particular year. So you can't predict it from two variables.
Yeah, you don't know the institutional priorities. You also don't know what the activities, the writing, or the recommendations are either.
Exactly.
Just by a plot, just by an intersection of a couple axes. And there are a few other prominent factors that make people uncomfortable to talk about, but they often play a significant role. And I'm referring to things such as how the ability to pay all or a large percentage of the cost of attendance can impact who's actually admitted or who is able to come. I don't think we've talked enough about this on the podcast, how ability to pay influences who actually gets in the door at a surprisingly large number of schools. Now, Dave and I are going to be talking about this on episode 261, 3 weeks from now, and what I regard as one of our more important in the news segments that we've done. So I'm not trying to put in a shameless plug for that episode. Well, maybe I am. I just don't want any of our listeners to miss that one, that discussion we're going to have on how ability to pay influences who gets in. And so you're not going to have any of that on scattergrams. You're not going to see it, nor will you see demonstrated interest, things like fit to major, and just so many other things. So just remember, a little bit of knowledge can be really dangerous with these scattergrams. So there's just so many unknown variables that, once again, I'm not saying they have no value, but what I often hear is people having a degree of confidence. But like I have people quoting back to me what they're seeing in Naviance or Score or Maya Learning or Grad Plus, or there's a million different. I learned about another one the other day, Zello. Like there's a lot of new competitors out there, and then you know Niche and CapEx and all these places. They all have their own scattergrams too, that they've generated. You know,
and those are all self-report data. So I mean, I don't know. Like I just can't think that they're getting a representative sample of people who are bothering to go back and tell Niche or CapEx whether they got in or not.
I think one thing they're helpful for is to point out that people with lower grades and lower scores get in over people with higher grades and higher scores.
Right.
Like, so you can look, why does this person with lower grades and lower scores got in and this person over here didn't? Because that's another bias that the public has, is that I have 15, 50, 35, 36, and I'm ranked so-and-so in my class, so my chances are great. Like those things can give false assurance. So I think there's some value there. So anyway, just had to share that. I haven't done one of these in a couple of weeks, and I wanted to, you know, when I have that lightning bolt that hits me, I like to bring it in. Otherwise, I'll lose my inspiration really fast.
So scatter away from those scattergrams.
Yeah, scatter away. I want to do some more visit updates too, because I did, as you know, several visits this summer, and I'm going to do little visit reports moving forward. So I haven't said anything about my visit to Denver or to, you know, CU Boulder or Colorado College or some other places that I went to. I want to do fuller spotlights on some of them, like UW Madison. But take it away, Lisa. What do you have for us today? I know the content.
All right.
Why don't you introduce it?
Today I am answering a question that was sent in by Mark from Atlanta. And this question is, how can parents help kids who are linking their self-esteem to the selectivity of the schools they are admitted to? And if they don't get into these highly selective schools, they tend to feel bad about themselves. I think, Mark, you and I both see this as like a huge problem right now.
Huge problem.
In college admission and, frankly, I think in American society. And so today I really want to focus on the parental role in maybe inadvertently contributing to this problem, and also offer some suggestions about how you can not contribute to this problem and maybe even mitigate it a little bit. But first, I always want to start off with a story. So this is a story of a time when I was just starting my classes at UC Irvine. So it was very early in the process. And there was a neighbor and a friend of mine, and she wanted to meet with me, like just to talk about college stuff at the local Panera, which was totally fine. And so, I always knew this friend was a rather competitive person, because we're both named Lisa, and she decided right away that she was Lisa number 1 and I was Lisa number 2, which I always thought was
what she told you? Did she say that?
She literally said that. I'm like, we can't switch off. Like, I don't even, whatever. But,
You're a humble
I'm not
person to go for that.
I'm just like, oh, whatever. So anyway, so Lisa number 1 starts telling me about her oldest son. And she says that her oldest son really loves music. And he is a really wonderful musician, but he likes expensive things. And so they are pushing him to take all these courses so he can be an engineer and get into Northwestern. And she felt like it was without question that this kid would get into Northwestern because she went to Northwestern and her husband went to Northwestern. And her parents went to Northwestern, and it would be like a travesty to the family if he didn't go to Northwestern and be an engineer. And I just I think my jaw dropped at that point. And I was like, it's a lot harder to get into Northwestern right now than it was when you went or when I was in college. Like, what do you realize what kind of pressure you're placing on your son? And so I, kind of pulled out my computer and showed her some stats, and that was a little bit surprising to her. But, she kept going on about, well, he needs to make money. He needs to make money. He has to be an engineer. But it's a very smart kid, so he could do all the AP stuff, but he wasn't loving it. And he was also on the baseball team, and he wasn't loving that either. And he loved music. And so I just kind of looked at her and said, well, Lisa, number one, why are you making your kid fit into something like be an engineer and play baseball when he doesn't want to do any of that stuff? And she's like, but if he's a musician, he won't make any money. I'm like, well, how do you know that? Like, there's all kinds of jobs in the music industry. And anyway, like, I think, have you asked him? Like, maybe he'd rather be a poor, happy musician than an unhappy, cranky engineer with like a, chronic baseball injury or something. And she just it was like one of those moments. And she just kind of stared at me about this, like, at first, like I was nuts, but then, she's like, well, there are no good schools for music. I'm like, well, what about Belmont? Belmont's a great school for music. She's like, well, but that one isn't very selective. So it doesn't count. I'm like, well, it's really selective for music, And so we went on like this for a while. And honestly, I felt a little rattled after this conversation. I remember driving to my office and just feeling like, okay, everyone's worth the same. It doesn't matter how anyone's trying to put themselves above you. Everyone's worth the same. But, the funny thing happened is she went home and she talked to her husband and her son. And she said it was like, it totally changed their family because the son was able to say, I don't want to do any of these things. I want to be in the musical. I want to be in the choir. I want to play my instruments. And so from that on, they let him do that. And he is starting at Belmont this fall. And, but he has had a great, rest of his high school, incredibly talented kid. I'm sure he's going to make a ton of money with whatever he does. But I bring up this story because I think it kind of points out a lot of what we're seeing with parents. So, and what are some takeaways? I'd say number one, parents are managing their own self-esteem through their kids' college process, right? Like he has to go to Northwestern because I did. And if he doesn't, it'll make me look bad. Now, some parents are very socially competitive. Some parents even rank the Lisas, right? So,
Who would that be?
yeah, I mean, some parents think that's fine.
I hope this isn't also, a podcast listener.
Oh, I'm sure. If she is, then whatever. Sorry, I'm number one now. No, just kidding. But I think also that parents underestimate the difficulty of being accepted to these highly selective college. So therefore, like unknowingly, they are pressuring kids to take on like pretty much a task that's impossible, right? Like even if you do all the things and do all the extracurriculars and get all the A's and take all the tests and get perfect scores, you still might not get into Harvard, right? I mean, it's still kind of a lottery ticket for the most part. And so you're putting them on this path to get a goal that they're never going to get. And number two, those goals, like in order to get even to the level of where you could be considered, it's kind of conflicts with the actual developmental needs of an adolescent person, right? So what do adolescents need to do? Like try out their own freedom, make mistakes, push limits. I don't think any of that is like included in the, like the be perfect all the time and do everything plan. And I really do think like in this process, we adultify kids. So like, and I'd say this is, I'm looking at you college admissions officers, like you expect these kids to have done all these things when they're just trying to figure themselves out. Their brain is changing, their bodies are changing, society's changing. And you want them to be like, let's have them write really insightful essays that show their self-knowledge at 17. And I mean, I'm a therapist. I talk to people all day long, and I can tell you that kind of self-knowledge is rare, even among adults. So I just think like the whole thing is kind of hard, and that parents are unwittingly, adding to that impact. Any thoughts?
Yeah, one thought I had is how much pressure kids can feel just when their parents went to very competitive schools, even when parents aren't doing any of the wrong things. I can think of a family that I worked with. Mom went to really high powered schools. Dad went to, flagship, very respected flagship, not one of the ones that people would think of as, the most prestigious, but a very respected flagship. But he went into business and then he was extremely financially successful. So, and this family was like almost the quintessential example of how not to pressure their kid. But yet still, when I met with him, he felt so much pressure to measure up. He actually wrote his college essay on it. Like, wow, it's really tough. Look what my dad did. Look what my mom did. And it's funny you say that. I literally, just before we recorded this, I was just thinking that I need to reach out to this family that I'm working with in California that I don't think they know that their daughter is feeling this pressure. And I don't think they're putting the pressure on the family, on the daughter either. It's another example where they're not putting the pressure, but the daughter is looking at the schools. One parent went to Stanford, another one went to another, really respected school. And it's interesting in this case, the daughter is expressing a reluctance to even want to apply to certain highly selective schools. And she's very strong, very strong. She's going to get 2 or 3 years past BC Calc in math. And she's getting like all high A's. But I was just thinking, I want to reach out to the family. I've had a conversation once, but I haven't quite put it the way I want to put it now, which is I think that this is why she doesn't want to even have these schools on her list, because she doesn't want to take the chance of looking like she failed and let you down. And then we know, and you can speak to this so much more. You can speak to it as a therapist. I can speak to it just from doing this for almost 25 years. Kids still do want to please their parents, no matter how much they act like all I care about is my peer group. Like, and sure, we know they care about their peer group. We're not saying they don't, but they also care about making you proud of them.
Oh, absolutely.
So I agree with everything you said. I mean, I would never say you can never get in those schools, but I know what you meant, that your chances are statistically, there's a better chance that you won't get in than you will. And you should conduct yourself accordingly. I know that's what you meant. But so I just wanted to emphasize just how circumspect I feel parents need to be, because even the ones that I've seen and the two that I'm thinking about, I really feel they are not parents who feel like their kids have to go to those schools. They're really much more into wanting their kid to do what they love and what they're good at, and it's their path and it's not my journey. And still the kid feels it because of the success of the parents or the status of where they went. And so to me, that just shows how circumspect, cautious a parent needs to be if when the parents that don't do any of the behaviors that we would say not to do, and still the kid feels a pressure.
Right.
That's my
And
thought.
I mean, yeah, I think that's a great point. And I think that, as I'll talk about, like, we almost, you just can't not do that. That's inarticulate. You shouldn't do nothing. You actually have to work, like, make effort to actively propose an alternate, like, way of viewing success in the world. And, the earlier you probably can start that, the better with kids, because of course they want to please their parents. And you have to remember, like, they are getting relentlessly marketed to by their peers, by colleges, by TV shows. I love the Netflix series Never Have I Ever, but these kids, one of them got into Stanford. The other one thinks she's going to get into Princeton because she said she has sick grades and great extracurriculars. And of course they're television shows, but they're fictional. But that, I don't know if that kid would have gotten into Stanford based on, the profile that I saw of his character, for instance. So,
can I say one more thing, Lisa?
Mm-hmm.
Something that, and I've actually heard you say this before, but every once in a while I hear a parent say this, and I feel like it's liberating to the kid. Like, I'm talking about a parent that's gotten into really a high-powered selective school, and they've said, "Do you know what the acceptance rate was when I went? I probably
Absolutely.
wouldn't get in now." Just saying something like that, that can just diffuse a lot for your
Oh,
kid.
absolutely. And I
Just
say
if they,
that, yeah.
yeah, I've heard you say that, and so, Dave says that about his schools.
Yeah, I say that to every kid that I work with because when they find out I went to the University of Chicago, they're like, "Oh my God, that school's so hard to get into." I'm like, that was a long time ago. I was a coin toss. I was like from Missouri, from like a farm. Like they needed me. It was not, I could not get in now with my grades and extracurriculars and test scores. I can tell you that right off the bat. So I just try to be very transparent about that. That like that was then, this is now. Now is insane. So, and I think we have talked a lot on this podcast about how kids are doing with their mental health, lately. And I think generally it's not great, right? And rates of anxiety and depression are higher than they've ever been. And so, we really do have to think very carefully about all of this, and to really try to help teenagers sort of not listen to all the messaging that they're going to get, and to take a different approach. So, what can a parent do? So I think before you ever open your mouth and start talking to your kid about which schools are good and which schools are bad, you need to go by yourself and do some research. Look at some admission rates, read some like maybe vignettes about, kids who've gotten in here, kids who haven't gotten in there. I mean, there's a lot of articles, that about, like, I remember reading one about this really great student, and she applied to all the Ivies and she didn't get into any of them. And she's fine. She's going to like ASU Barrett Honors College for free. I mean, it all worked out for her, but like the point is, it's like just, look at stuff like that and then really try to educate yourself. So you're not accidentally giving your kid the impression that something is more possible than it is, and that you're going to be kind of surprised or disappointed if it doesn't happen. And then, I think that the other thing is like, and this is hard, but, try not to get caught up in competition with other parents. Like, that's why with Lisa number one, I just never said anything about being Lisa number two. I was like, whatever, it doesn't matter. I'm not going to fight
Yeah,
about
good for
this
you.
because there's no point to it. Like, she
Sure.
can call me Lisa number 27. It doesn't matter. I'm still who I am, and your kid is still who they are, and their kids are still who they are. And, sometimes people are lucky and sometimes they're not. And we just, if your kid feels even the slightest that you're going to be disappointed in them compared to like what that kid next door or down the street did, then it just unconsciously puts a lot of tension into your situation. Another suggestion is that like you have to remember that like life isn't linear, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So there's a lot of paths and someone can be successful. If someone is like has like the ingredients for success in them, like, they're got a decent like, academic skill set, they work hard, they're organized, like they're going to be successful wherever they go, whatever they do. And there's so many different paths to get there. And that's the thing that like I think we have to emphasize to kids is like, there's not just one way. There's not just like, Yale or the highway, right? It's like so many different paths. You could take a gap year. You could go to community college. You'll be fine with any of those things as long as you keep up with those criteria. And then I have some more ideas, but I just want to stop here and see what you have to say.
No, I think this is great stuff. Another idea I'd like to add is when you do your college tours, please visit schools with a wide range of selectivities.
Yes.
Because I see that a lot. We're going to do the college tour. We're going to Boston, so we're doing Harvard and we're doing MIT. And we'll throw Tufts in with its 9% acceptance rate.
Right.
And people think that's balanced. And you have to be very careful with Boston because Boston has a lot of really highly competitive schools. Northeastern has got a low acceptance rate. BU regular's got a low acceptance rate. BC has a low acceptance rate. And so that's a very popular place for people to go, is to go there. And if you're going to Pennsylvania, you need to go to more than just Penn and Swarthmore, and so that also is a very subtle way of that puts pressure on a kid. And that's something that I would encourage you to push back on if the kid wants to do it.
Mm-hmm.
Friends, this completes the first half. Hope you'll join us next week for the final part.
And now this week's interview with a special guest.
Friends, last week you heard the first part of our interview. Now it's time for the second part. I know TCU has a core. Talk to us about the core curriculum. And, that term can intimidate people. There's a lot of people that they love open. Give me open. And they hear core and they get intimidated. So
right.
Talk to us about the core without intimidating everybody, if you can do such a thing.
Sure. Well, I think the core curriculum, it doesn't need to be intimidating. First of all, it only represents roughly a third of the coursework that you're going to take at TCU. And second, there aren't specific classes that need to be taken. Rather, there are competencies that you need to fulfill. So you have options even within the core of how to complete those requirements. In that way, it acts a little bit more like distribution requirements that some colleges have, but again, a little bit different. So our core consists of three basic elements. The first is essential competencies. So that's like, your quantitative reasoning, your writing, etc. Because no matter what you do, no matter what you study, you have to be able to write, you have to be able to think logically, which is where the quantitative element comes in. Then you have something called human experiences and endeavors, and that's primarily your social sciences and humanities type courses. And then you've got something called heritage, mission, vision, and values. And this goes back to what I was saying before about how the mission really works its way into the curriculum. One element of the heritage, mission, vision, and values, HMVV rather, that we call it, is something called religious traditions. So everyone asks, well, if I'm going to Texas Christian University, do I have to take classes in Christianity? And the answer is no, you don't have to take classes in Christianity. You do have to take 3 credits in a religious tradition, because to understand the world around us would be impossible if you don't understand the role that religion plays. But what that religious tradition is entirely up to the student. And this is getting back to what I was saying before, that you can fulfill a requirement in a number of different ways. So certainly there are students who come here and they say, yeah, I'd love to take classes in Christianity, and we've got lots of them. There are other students who say, you know what, I've been doing that for a while. I'm pretty active in my church. I think I get it. I'd like to take a class in Eastern religions or Caribbean religions, and that would satisfy our religious tradition requirement as well. These classes have a way of overlaying each other so that you could take a class and, for lack of a better term, double dip. It could satisfy multiple parts of the core curriculum, which is why I say roughly a third, because depending on how you construct your schedule, again, there's a good deal of latitude. It could be a little bit less, which would allow a student to very easily pick up a second major or a major and 2 minors and so forth.
How is that different than distribution? Because it sounded a lot like distribution requirements.
It's a good question. I'd have to talk to the folks at the core to understand that. That's a little bit outside my bailiwick, I guess.
No problem. Now, I know Greek life is fairly present. How does that impact the TCU experience and the TCU culture?
Greek life is big here. There's no question about it. Roughly 50% of students are involved in a Greek letter organization. It's a little bit more for those who I identify as female, a little bit less for those who identify as male. But again, about half the students here. It's not all in maybe the way we see what a traditional fraternity or sorority looks like, or the way that that's portrayed in media. We've got Christian fraternities, we've got multicultural fraternities and sororities. So there are a lot of options for students, and it is very visible on our campus. The way I describe it to students is this way. If you think you want to do it, great. If you think you don't want to do it, great. There's certainly ample opportunity for students um, to be socially um, quenched without having to be part of the Greek letter organization. I think those students who struggle with Greek life are those who are opposed to it on a fundamental level. Like if you philosophically believe Greek life is wrong, then TCU will feel to you like a place where you are swimming upstream the entire time. But if you're just sort of a person who is ambivalent about it, then you'll be fine. But Greek life is big here. There's no question about it. Again, don't have to do it, but if you would like to, lots of different ways that you can approach it.
Speaking more of that sort of social and maybe political climate, I'm curious how you would categorize TCU as would you categorize it as a conservative institution, a progressive institution? How would you describe it?
It's a really good question, Julia, and I don't have a good answer for you other than to say I don't know that we can label it. I think that our students truly stand all across the social political spectrum. If we were to line them up from one end to the other, I think it's fair to say that the median student would lean a little bit toward the conservative side. But we have students here who believe in all sorts of different things, which is part of what makes college great, right? That you're coming to a space where you're going to have your worldview challenged. Not everybody here thinks the same way or looks the same way or acts the same way. And it's why I love it so much. The former university minister would describe TCU as the only mainstream Protestant university with the word Christian in its name. So if you think of all the other colleges that are called something Christian something, they look very different from TCU, and that's not a judgment. That's just a statement of fact. So that's why I think some people would assume we are more, extreme than we probably are. I think conservative students feel very comfortable on our campus. I think students who are liberal leaning also feel very comfortable on our campus, and they all feel, or hopefully feel, comfortable in the discomfort that their worldviews are going to be challenged here, but challenged in a really good way. That we have as part of our core curriculum, and this is relatively new within the last 3 years, is a DEI component. So diversity, equity, and inclusion, which has been sort of a buzz phrase on college campuses across the country over the last 5 to 10 years. The faculty actually adopted that as part of our core curriculum. So you can draw whatever conclusion you want from that, other than to say, I don't know that a school that would be labeled conservative would do that.
Yep.
I just got back from Colorado, and I was meeting with a family there who I know and I'm actually working with, and their son had just got back from an excellent 1-week program you do for people maybe thinking about careers in finance.
Yep. The High School Investor Challenge.
Yeah, the High School Investor Challenge. And the dad was like, I thought TCU was so conservative, but Heath opens up and he recognizes like the Indian community in the area, like that. Very conservative schools don't do that. The land.
Yeah, and we do a land acknowledgement at our admission programs. Now, I think it's worth noting that just as our students reflect a spectrum, so too do our staff and faculty. So I might choose to do that, but I wouldn't say that that's necessarily universal. And again, to me, this is not a bad thing. This is actually a good thing.
No, this is great, Heath. I want to transition and talk about some of your stronger programs, at least nationally or reputationally.
Mm-hmm.
And when we put together these interviews, we reach out to all of the talent on our team and ask them for some questions. And so this comes from Vince, who's a counselor in California, and he's heard really good things about your career services, and he'd like you to elaborate a little bit more on Why is he hearing so many good things about TCU's career services? What are they doing that makes it special?
When I was in college, I remember going to career services at some point in my senior year, probably second semester, and saying, oh, I guess it's time for me to start thinking about life after college. And that's just not the model anymore. We start working with students on career aspirations from day one. And the way it's structured in our Center for Career and Professional Development is there are career specialists who know the field that the student is going into. So it's not like you walk into a deli counter and take one of those pink tickets and like next person up. Rather, if you are a student in the College of Fine Arts, you are going to be paired with a specialist who works with all of our students in the College of Fine Arts so that they can find the appropriate internship for you. They can help you develop your resume. They can build your interview skills and then help identify the right jobs for you after college. This happens, by the way, also with faculty. Our faculty are super invested in the students. So there's a great partnership there. And so even though the career specialists work out of a central office, the Center for Career and Professional Development, they are also often in meetings with leadership in each of the academic areas as well. You will find them meeting with department chairs and deans because they want to know those areas super, super well. So again, if you're a dance major in the College of Fine Arts, you've got one specialist. If you are a physics major in our College of Science and Engineering, you've got a different specialist. If you're a religion major in the Adran College of Liberal Arts, you've got a different specialist. So I think that is part of the secret sauce. And then the other thing that makes it so special is once you are a Horned Frog, you're a Horned Frog for life. So you get access to the Career Center forever. And you're not paying extra to hire a career coach in 25 years if you decide you want a career change. You've already paid into the system. You come back and you work with a specialist. There's one other thing I wanted to note, which it's possible that other colleges do something like this. I'm not aware of it. You guys could tell me if I'm wrong or if they are. We offer something called the Internship Scholarship Program, which is an opportunity for students to be funded for unpaid internships. And this very much speaks to me because I was a political science major in college, and poli-sci majors don't get paid internships on Capitol Hill. And so for someone like me, a student like that would be forced into a really difficult choice. Do I do something that's going to help advance my career aspirations, or do I have some spending money for the upcoming semester? And what the Internship Scholarship Program says is you don't have to make that choice. You can do the internship you want and get paid for it. So we have literally hundreds of thousands of dollars set aside for students to get these internships. And we fund hundreds of students every year to do just that.
You're not the only one but it's a really good thing. So yeah. It's something that's caught on, and I don't know, would you say since you started at Milton, or I know it's been less than 10 years, more and more schools are starting these programs. What do you say, Julia? When do you think you started first hearing that?
Yeah, I was lucky that when I went to college, there was a fellowship, but just for like 8 students for one particular time in your life to do that. And it did not cover most of my expenses. And I remember being like, wow, this is great. So I do think it is, it's on the rise, and I definitely see it more at places where we've heard of a lot of good access and equity work. I'm thinking of places like Williams College, a lot of the small liberal arts, which might have a little more bandwidth to do something like that. But what I do hear a lot of, Heath, is that or Grinnell is a really good example with their amount of funding for students. But a lot of the time, if there are these sort of scholarships set in place, they tend to be finite or really competitive. So even if that's there, it's sort of like my experience where maybe it's I don't know, 200 students vying for 8 to 10, scholarships, if you will, rather than like, oh, you should just go, once you're interested, go to this office and apply for the money.
Yeah. I mean, I wouldn't say it's a guarantee, but it's not especially competitive. I mean,
Nice.
if you've got a compelling, story to tell, then we'll find a way to fund it.
Mm.
Awesome.
Let's take a break to learn about Mark's recommended resource for the week.
Friends, the recommended resource for episode 255 is a book called Accept It, subtitled 50 Successful College Admissions Essays. And this book has been so impactful in my own life that, quite honestly, I regard it as podcast or counseling malpractice. It took me till year 5 to share it as a recommended resource for you. It just really deconstructs the personal statement in a way that really lets people get it. It looks at the ingredients of the essay. Great section on how to find the right topic. My favorite section is the roundtable with admission officers, where you get insights into all of these admission officers on the personal statement. There's a fantastic section on 25 common mistakes people make on their personal statement. And then the essence of the book, 50 plus essays that you get to read, and then you have admission officer, college counselor commentary on the essays. It's a fantastic way to learn. I do some training of younger college counselors, and this is a book I always recommend that they read. It's one of my 2 go-to books when it comes to the personal statement, and I can't recommend it enough. It's by Gene and Kelly Tanabe, and if that name sounds familiar, we've promoted their book. They have the best book out on how to find local scholarships from outside scholarships, civic organizations, corporations, foundations, philanthropists. Their book comes out every year, and it's the one book that I recommend purchasing for that as well. And they've done some other great work on essays. I may come back again in the future with another one of their books, but trust me, friends, just pick up the book, Accept It, 50 Successful College Admission Essays, or get it from your local library. We'll now return to my interview with Heath Einstein. So another thing is your honors college.
Yes.
Gets very good reviews, and it's kind of a 2-parter. One, tell us about your honors college, and once again, Vince from California wants to get a sense of the admitted student profile.
So the John V. Roach Honors College is really a true gem at TCU. A student can be enrolled, will be enrolled simultaneously in one of the other colleges. So we have 8 undergraduate degree granting colleges, and then the Honors College. Students apply during the application process for admission to the university will simultaneously apply for admission to the Honors College. And I think what is distinguishing about the process is that, and I'm happy to share the profile, we're not looking at the numbers. We really aren't looking at like trying to say who's got the highest ACT score, the highest GPA, which we could very easily do. But we're trying to bring in students who genuinely want a different academic experience. So so I'll get to that process in a second. The Honors College is designed as an interdisciplinary program, such that students are taking courses that help them understand the connective tissue that binds seemingly disparate fields. So you'll find courses that sound really, really interesting and different. And so, for example, we've got a course here called The Nature of Philanthropy. And it's a semester-long course that explores the history of philanthropy and then gives the students money to give away. And they have to come up with, in small groups, they work on studying different nonprofit organizations. They become very familiar with tax returns that these organizations have to, because they're really investigating, what these organizations are all about, and they need to then make a persuasive argument to their classmates so that and you can understand these students get really invested in this, why it takes an entire semester to do this. But that's the kind of like super different kind of stuff that's happening in the Honors College, and why it makes it, I think, super appealing for our students. There's a residential component as well. Students will live their first year in Milton Daniel Hall, which is specifically for our honors students, because it is both a curricular and a co-curricular college. So what we're looking for is a demonstration of thirst for knowledge. And that you can't tell by looking at an SAT score or a transcript. So the essays that students submit on their application for the Honors College really become the distinguishing factor. And it's our honors faculty who are reviewing those essays, grading them, and making and working with our office and coming up with the final decision on who gets invited to enroll. So we'll have, out of an incoming class that this year overall at the university will be somewhere around between 24 and 2,500 students. About 275 will be in the Honors College. So, about 10%, maybe a little bit more of our students. And students who are in the Honors College need to take about one honors class a semester. It's in lieu of one of your other classes, not on top of, because we don't want this to be, we want it to be challenging, but not onerous. So students will take an Honors College class per semester, roughly. And then when they get to their upper division years, they'll decide whether they want to pursue departmental honors, which would be writing a thesis, or university honors, which is another set of courses that they have to take. There are some rather eager beavers who will do both of those, the departmental and university honors.
It's good stuff. So I want to talk to you, or have you comment on 4 areas that I will often refer you to, because I think your programs are very strong, and fill in some details so we can understand them more. And I'll kind of give them to you in pairs. And so the first 2 would be business and communications. What can you tell us about those offerings, and why, what makes TCU special for somebody interested in either area?
When people think about TCU from an academic perspective, while we offer 130-ish areas of study, business is usually one of the first 2 things that they think of. Our Neely School of Business is consistently ranked in the top 20 to 25 programs at the undergraduate level. The Economist has rated our faculty at the graduate level as number 2 in the world. We have the luxury of being in an area that has a lot of economic diversity. So we're attracting faculty who have been in the workforce and have led businesses, have created businesses, sometimes in Fortune 500 companies, sometimes small businesses. So the students are hearing from practitioners what's going on, as well as more traditional faculty members. So I think they've got exposure to that. Students are enrolled initially as pre-business majors. So when students are given an offer from TCU, if they've indicated on their application that they want to pursue something in the business realm, they will spend the first 2 years as pre-business students and then apply for full, membership, so to speak, for their degree in business. We do that because we want students to really understand what they're getting into. It is not a weed out process. At some colleges, you start as pre-business, and they may have 1,000 students, but they only really have spot for 250 of them. That's not the case at TCU. Theoretically, every student who starts as pre-business will get a degree in business, but many of them will decide after taking some introductory classes that's not exactly what they want to do. Maybe they want to study communication or economics, which is not in the business school, or something entirely different. Once they're in the business program, then they designate what their major is going to be, whether it's finance or information systems or supply chain or entrepreneurship and innovation, or any number of other areas that we offer. So I think, again, what's distinctive is the quality of our faculty, the location, And then again, the fact that I could say this for any major, the fact that there's an emphasis here on the undergraduate experience. We do have graduate programs in business. You can get an MBA, you can get a master's in accountancy or others. But so many of the students here are undergrads. We are launching a program here this fall, an early admission master's program with about 5 programs across the university, one of which is our data analytics program in the Neely School of Business. So a student could apply to TCU with any undergraduate major and simultaneously apply for conditional admission to our master's program in the Neely School for data analytics, which you could understand pairs really nicely with many, many different fields. So we're really excited about that. Okay, you also asked about communication. Our Bob Schieffer College of Communication is named after Bob Schieffer, who was a 1959 alumnus of TCU. And folks who are listening would probably recognize his name as host of Face the Nation on CBS News for years and years and years.
I knew he was old, but 1959, you proved it.
Yeah, well, and Bob is fantastic, still very generous with his time to the university. Bob and his wife, Pat, they're fantastic. And we offer programs in communication studies, journalism, strategic communication, and it's the fourth one is escaping me. It'll come to me in a minute. Strategic communication is a very interesting major. It is sort of a fancy way of saying advertising and PR, but we have a student-run ad agency called Roxo, so a lot of hands-on experience here. Our student publications through our journalism program are also top rate. We have TCU 360, which is an online student publication. We have the Skiff, which comes out twice a week. It comes out online, but we also still produce a paper version. So we always have copies in our office. And so it's really fun to see what students can do there.
No, that's great. And you probably know this, but Poets and Quants, which looks at undergraduate business schools, all kinds of different ways. But in their most recent study that they released, it was a survey of would alumni go back to their same school?
Yep.
And they had almost 100 different undergraduate business schools rated, and you guys are number 2 to Wharton.
Yeah.
And so I've been sending that out to my people when I recommend you that are in business, and they're impressive. You know, we all have our mixed views of rankings and their various formulas, but I think that's a pretty powerful one. It's just a simple question.
Sure.
Would you do it again? And so to me, that's one I like. And to me, that's one that has some credibility.
I agree completely. I always say I'm not a fan of rankings unless they make us look good. And so I use that ranking as well. By the way, the other program in Schieffer that I forgot to mention, and it came to me, film, television, and digital media, a pretty important one. But I did want to make sure I got that one in.
I knew it was going to come back to you. I knew it. So 2 other programs that I know you're exceptionally strong. Probably the one I've referred to you the most has been anything in pre-med, nursing, biology, health sciences. And then the second one would be fine arts, dance, and theater. So what do you want to share about those? I know they're very different, but I also know they're very strong, and each one I think deserves its own attention.
So I mentioned earlier that business is one of the 2 programs that we probably get the most attention for. Nursing is the other one. Our nursing program is second to none. It is a direct entry program, meaning students apply and are admitted directly to the program. They don't have to, there's no secondary application process. And that's important because, again, at some schools with some programs, you start thinking you're going to do something, and then you don't get in, and then you have to transfer, or you do something else. But that's not the case here. So 1 is direct entry. 2 is it's on this campus. At some colleges, their nursing program is separate, in a separate physical space. So the students are completely integrated into the life of the TCU community. Number 3, we guarantee that our nursing students will begin their clinical rotation experience in their sophomore year. And a clinical rotation, for those who don't know the nomenclature, is like an internship for nursing students. And we leverage the contacts we have here in North Texas in the medical community. We're very close to the hospitals right here in Fort Worth. So our students don't have to go very far to get that hands-on experience. And number 4 is they get to wear purple scrubs, and everybody looks good in purple. So,
of course.
So nursing,
they don't have horn frogs on them.
I got to take a look next time. I don't know if they have horn frogs on them. So nursing is truly outstanding. Anything in the pre-health field is great. We're consistently rated as a top 3 med program. Our students are getting into med school at about twice the national average. We've tracked this over the course of the last 40 plus years. The national rate for getting into med school is usually a little over 40%, and our students get in at 80%. And that's not us cooking the numbers. We're really clear with students throughout. It's a rigorous program. So if they're not going to get through, they need to know that pretty early on. But it's not us telling them they can't apply or we won't support them, as some schools will do. No, truly 80% of our students who apply to medical school will have at least one offer of admission. And then they do well once they get there. And that's really the proof of the quality of your program. So we send a lot of students to med school at UT Southwestern over in Dallas. We have for a long time. And students who come from TCU, it's been reported to us, will have a med school GPA that's about 2 or 3/10 of a point higher than students who don't come from TCU. So we know that our students are doing well once they get there. We actually just opened a medical school a couple of years ago on our campus. So that's been a really exciting endeavor for us and completely changed the landscape here in North Texas. So yeah, the pre-health programs are very, very strong. And then you asked about fine arts, dance, and theater. So we have a College of Fine Arts at TCU offering programs in music, theater, and dance, which are audition based for the BFA programs or the music programs. In theater, we have a BA as well, which is non-audition based. So students have that opportunity. We were the first university in America to offer ballet as a major. People don't realize that. So we have quite an illustrious history in the fine arts. And by the way, I should note the College of Fine Arts also offers program in fashion merchandising and interior design and some other areas. But to the ones that you specifically asked about, I think that our programs are distinctive because, again, marrying academic program with location, our students have ample opportunity to develop their performance skills here, but also get involved in the arts world in North Texas. And then they're getting just the best faculty. I mean, we've got faculty in theater who come directly from Broadway, and so you're getting instruction from people who have been there and done that. So you could look at any of those fields and you'd see TCU alumni all over the place. There was the touring company of Hamilton came through here recently, and we had a TCU alum who's in the company, and so it's really cool to see that your students are actually being able to practice what they came here to study. And to parents who may be wondering, why am I spending all this money to send my kid for a theater major, which I know is a common question, because they're going to get work and they're going to get to do something that they love professionally.
I'll tell you this really quickly, just because it's a hot off the press story from yesterday. So I'm working with this family in Northern California, very interested in direct admit nursing. And I had recommended TCU to them. And this family, the daughter and the mom, they do their research. They do their homework. So in my session yesterday, we were going over the final list. And they were like, really excited about TCU direct admit nursing. So there you go.
Awesome. You go. Love hearing that.
Friends, this concludes the second part of what is a 3-part interview. We hope you'll join us next week for the final part. Friends, on Monday's episode, of course, we'll have our traditional announcements, and I can't tell you what they will be yet because I don't know. I try to look at what's in the news a day or two before we go live. And then we'll start a brand new interview, and it's very exciting for a lot of reasons. It's with Matthew Ward. Matthew Ward is the VP of Enrollment at California Lutheran University, and it's Vince Garcia's first interview. And, you'll just sense the chemistry that the two of them have because Matt and Vince worked together for some time. And you'll see that chemistry come through. It's a very much an underrated school that should be on the radar of a lot more people than it is. I think you'll really enjoy Vince's first interview with his old colleague and good friend, Matthew Ward. Friends, I ended with some pearls of wisdom from Chris Gruber, the Dean of Admission at Davidson College. All right, last question. Your best, well, it's really two, but your best advice for students? I'm going to give you three because you
keep changing the number. What's the deal here? Come on, you're a professional interviewer. What are you doing?
Being unprofessional. Best advice to students, parents, and college counselors.
Yeah. I think for students, one is going to be appreciate that you have more control of this process than you ever think. You do. There's so much of it that you can shape. Do things early, do things in a timely fashion, and you're going to do very, very well. And know that there's not just one place. I think there are a variety of places that you can go to. Treat it as though it's almost an additional course. Spend some good time on it. Because I think where you spend your next 4 years can be a powerful, powerful thing for you. So there's one. To the parents, I think students feel a lot of pressure in this process. The greatest thing to do is tell your students right now, before they're starting the college search process, that you're proud of them. And it will have nothing to do with the label that you put on the back of the car, or the sticker, or the sweatshirt, or the hat that you ultimately end up wearing down the road. You're proud now, and it doesn't have to do with where they're getting into college. And with counselors, it's always going to be, know that we're in this together. We are partners, we are colleagues, and we are here to serve. And I know that there's a lot of places that you need to be managing and understanding, but let us know how we can help you. We're ready to do it at any step of the game.
And that's our show. A big thank you to you, our listeners, for tuning in this week. If you find this podcast helpful, please follow us, and you'll get every single episode as soon as it is released. If you're interested, there are a few ways you can really support our podcast. You can click the share button and send it to your friends and acquaintances. You can help us pay our staff and our expenses by donating on our website. You can write a review for us on Apple or Spotify. I'm the producer of the podcast, but we have a fantastic team of 14. Shout out to our co-host, Dr. Lisa Ruff, Dr. David Williams, Susan Tree, Vince Garcia, and Julia Esquivel. And to our substitute co-host, Sylvia Borgo. Our sensational sound engineer is Nemanja Motvich. Our amazing music is from Victor Allen Weeks. Marketing designs are from Kimberly Blass. Lily Parikh manages our Instagram. Our image editor is Talha Khan. Joy Stucker does our website episode updates. And our webmaster is Stalianos Dimitriou. If you want to have a coaching session with Lisa or me, just text me at 404-664-4340. If you have a question you want us to answer, or if you have a recommended resource or article you think we should discuss, just send it to questions@yourcollegeboundkid.com. By the way, check out our website, where you'll find lots of content that is not on any podcast app. Our website is yourcollegeboundkid.com. If you want to learn about other hot admissions topics, follow us on Twitter at YCBK Podcast. We think of you as our listening family, and we look forward to meeting again with you every single Thursday.